Why can't dinosaurs clap their hands together? Because they're dead. What's going on, YouTube? Update 44 is coming out this week on PC, and it's coming out an additional 2 weeks on Xbox and PlayStation. And I thought, what better time to break down some cheap, easy PvP builds, good sets that work together, or just good sets in general. So we're going to break down cheap sets that you can buy, what classes are they good for, and how generally you can build them in. I will say, too, that we're going to also briefly touch upon 10 to 50 battlegrounds because there's really only a few set combos that work really well there. And we will also talk about Mythics and Dungeon sets very briefly because technically those are free. So I guess you could say it's a cheap PvP build because it uses a Mythic. But also I wanted this focus to be sets that you could buy or that were crafted. But I also want you to know, hey, these are OP Mythics as well. So we're going to have a very short section on that, and there'll be chapters below that you're able to skip around in. And as always, we do super fast YouTube intros, so if you please don't mind, hit the subscribe button and hit the like button. I try to get at least 5 to 10% likes per views, so if you're able to, thank you. Let's jump into it. And let's start with 10 to 50 PvP, because it's relatively the easiest, and it's very straightforward. I think Twice Born is the go-to 10 to 50 PvP set, because as your gear gets further and further away from your level, you'll notice that 2, 3, and 4 get significantly weaker. However, the 5-piece Mundus Stone effect, by letting you use 2 Mundus Stones, does not get weaker, meaning as you level up and you need to swap out gear, you have less of a negative penalty for doing so. There are definitely milestones that I would recommend getting PvP gear at. In fact, as you notice as I'm going through, it's actually cheapest if you have level 16 gear, 26 gear, 36, and 46 gear. The reason for that is if I made, a different tier here, I have to use more ingots and different things at those levels. So I generally recommend just staying lined up with those intervals that I just said for you. But overall, having an extra Mundus Stone is great. You want to give yourself extra health, extra weapon damage, spell damage, magicka, stamina. Give yourself pretty much anything and you'll be good to go. And the second set is not as important for your 10 to 50 battlegrounds. I personally, though, love the 5-piece bonus from Heartland Conqueror. Slap on either Sharpened or Nirnhold and you'll be able to do tons of damage with this bad boy as an output. And overall, these are the two sets that I would combine together. Now, you're not going to be able to really get an arena weapon or a monster set unless you've done some really gobbledygook things. So overall, just slap on like a trainee piece or a druidic piece to go with that. And this is the easy combo that I would go with for 10 to 50 battlegrounds or Cyrodiil. And now we're going to break down Mythics. The reason I wanted to do that is because Mythics realistically are so popular. Generally, you're going to have 2 offense sets and then a defense set or a sustain set or something that gives you the more survivability. So you're going to notice that trend as you see some pretty popular PvP builds. 2 things that are increasing your damage output, and then something that keeps you alive, or some sets that kind of do multiple things at once. Which brings us to our first Mythic, actually pretty decently, because while at full health, you gain a 40% damage reduction. Pretty helpful. You're going to be at full health pretty frequently in PvP, especially if somebody's trying to gank you. The immediate burst is going to have a 40% damage reduction. After taking damage while at full health, you gain Serpent's Rebuke for 10 seconds, snaring yourself by 40%, giving you Major Berserk and Major Courage, increasing your damage done by 10% and your weapon and spell damage by 430. Overall, it's just a great Mythic, gives you easy damage output. It will make you a little bit slower, but when you consider the fact that pretty much every class has speed ups, teleports, blinks, access to other ways of movement, it's a overall still great Mythic that's used. And now probably the most popular current PvP Mythic that you could use on any single class with really no negative drawbacks. The negative drawbacks are pretty much that it's random, but it's randomly always pretty good. So while in combat, you gain 1 of 5 random major buffs, which changes every 10 seconds. And then enemies within 12 meters of you gain 1 of 5 random minor debuffs, depending on which buff you have. So Major Berserk is tied to Minor Maim, Major Resolve is tied to Minor Breach, Major Force, Minor Brittle, Major Evasion, Minor Vulnerability, Major Courage, and Major Cowardice. Ironically, these are all pretty good buffs to be able to put on other players. And this is probably going to be the most popular PvP mythic, so this is the one that I would probably put the most time and effort investing into if you wanted to wear the most meta builds. We're going to talk about build specific ones at the end, popular loadouts. We're going to continue to break down the sets though individually. I don't like the Oaken Soul Ring for PvP because I think it's very restrictive. And the overall, the buffs can be gained from other places, and oftentimes you're getting them from multiple places and you can't bar swap, but it's very popular. It does give you access to tons of buffs, and then because you get buffs from so many other places, you then don't have to use specific skills to give you those buffs or specific other sets to give you those buffs. It does limit you to 1 bar, which I think can limit your overall skill cap depending on the type of class that you're playing, but it is very popular still. And Death Dealers is a bit of an honorable mention, Shao, because you're pretty much usually only going to wear this on a sorcerer, because sorcerers generally want to just build maximum magicka stamina and health, and that's really what this does. As you're in combat, you build those resources out significantly faster just by being in combat. Overall, this is probably going to be pretty restrictive in the classes that you put it on, but that doesn't take away from the fact that Sorcerer is an S tier. This is an S tier mythic for Sorcerers, therefore it's definitely worth mentioning. And now to our quick mention of a really popular dungeon set before we pivot to our normal crafted or cheap Overland sets, and that's Tarnished Nightmare. We have to talk about it because it is so popular. It's the fact where it's being nerfed to actually give us a 1 to 2 second delay because it gives you 2, 3, and 4 of crit chance, and on 5 piece, when you do critical damage to an enemy, glass shards burst 8 meters around them, dealing 1129 physical damage to the enemies in the burst, and they all get the sundered effect. This can occur once every 8 seconds, and you're going to see this very frequently in PvP. It is being nerfed. I don't know if it's going to be still as popular, but this with the Saint and Seducer mythic was one of the most commonly put together combos, and then they would wear one of the other sets that you're going to see coming up here soon. It will probably lose some favorability after the updates release just because it's being nerfed, but there's still some great cheap options, which we're going to break down now. And so let's start with Clever Alchemist. The reason why I love Clever Alchemist is it gives you 2 bars of health as well as weapon and spell damage, and when you drink a potion during combat, you feel a rush of energy, increasing your weapon and spell damage by 675 for 20 seconds. That is a ton of weapon and spell damage that you're going to be able to control when it comes up. The Saint Seducer mythic, for example, gives you a random buff and debuff, so it can be a bit harder to control and wait to find the specific ones, but it's overshadowed by the fact that they're all so good. And a lot of other proc sets, and a proc set is just you do something and something else occurs, you generally have to do something specific with a % chance to happen. You know when you're going to drink your own potion, therefore you know when you're going to get that huge burst of weapon and spell damage, which is nice because if you're about to do your combo on somebody in PvP, you can time that with drinking a potion, and you'll easily be able to control when you're going to be able to get your increases. I do also love that it comes with health because I think 30,000 health is the bare minimum unless you're doing a Nightblade or Stealth build inside of Cyrodiil, so it helps you get to that 30k threshold as well. Next one is Stoon's Favor, and we are going to go through all of the crafted sets first just because crafted is technically free. And if you aren't in my Discord, join my Discord because we have people who can help make you crafted sets regardless of whatever server you play on. But Stoon's Favor is a great one because a lot of very popular classes, notably Dragon Knights, like to abuse things like off balance. And when you deal damage to an enemy who's off balance, your offensive penetration is increased by 5,312. The other nice thing about crafted sets is you get to pick whether you want to make them in light, medium, or heavy. Now, as long as you're getting to 7,000 to 8,000 minimum penetration, I would say you could put the rest into other types of armor, whether that be medium or heavy, which is going to either increase your defensive attributes or it's going to increase your weapon and spell damage. Just something to note because a lot of people, they don't know if they should make things into light, medium, or heavy. I generally say you just want to make sure you have 7,000 to 8,000 penetration, whether you're getting that through a 5-piece set, whether you're getting that through a sharpened trait on your weapons is going to be up to you. And obviously you only need that on your front bar. If your back bar is a defensive bar, which I generally recommend for players, you don't need to have as much penetration if you're not penetrating any enemies. Which leads into another really good option, Shattered Fate Craftable Set. Gives you 7,918 offensive penetration as its 5-piece. And if you wanted to make it its 10 and 12, you could get a bunch of weapon and spell and crit chance. Notably, however, there's no 2, 3, and 4, so just keep that in mind as you're considering if you want to use this set. But this also works in Raven Watch and any sort of non-proc Cyrodiil things. We're not going to go into whole the non-proc things. I'm just mentioning that kind of here in passing, just in case you're interested in it. But that could be a whole other conversation in and of itself. Next up is Wretched Vitality, another craftable set. Don't worry, I'll tell you when we pivot to Overland Sets and their general cost. This one is going to be used to basically keep you alive with giving you tons of resource sustain. It also gives you a bit of weapon and spell for its 4, but you can see its 2 is magicka recovery, its 3 is stamina recovery while in combat for its 5 piece. Applying a major buff or debuff to a target grants you 260 magicka and stamina recovery for 15 seconds, while in combat, applying a minor debuff to a target grants you 130 magicka and stamina for 15 seconds. So you can see tons of sustain, and again, it's craftable, meaning you can easily maneuver if you want to do a couple light, couple medium, couple heavy, which is why I do love me some crafted sets for PvP. And this is an S tier PvP set, regardless of all of the other sets that you can get in the game. All of the sets that we've talked about are easily A to S tier sets, and that's what we're focusing on for this video. So don't worry, we're not sneaking in any B tier sets. These are all sets that would easily fit within the S or the A tier. It's just going to come down to, do you think that this set is going to be good for you as a player based on how you like to play the game? Next up is Daedric Trickery. This used to be one of the most popular PvP sets in the game. It still definitely is an A tier set. What it does, 2, 3, and 4 is health, stam, magicka. Always love to see that because you're going to probably use all of those resources in PvP these days. And when you deal damage, you gain 1 of 5 random major buffs for 21 seconds. Every 9 seconds, those eligible ones are Expedition, Protection, Mending, Heroism, or Vitality. All of which are pretty decent. None of them are absolutely fantastic. It's definitely not as good as the Saint and the Seducer Mystic, but it does stack with it because there's really not a whole lot of overlap in any of the buffs that you're getting from there. And these buffs are able to have overlap in amongst themselves as well. So as long as you're not getting them from other places, you can get tons of buffs from this set. And because it's giving you some resources, we always love that as well. And if you're looking to give yourselves a bit of crit damage, Order's Wrath is the way to go. The nice thing about Order's Wrath is that crit is just universally good, and being able to, as an unnamed buff, increase your critical damage and healing by 8% is good. You could weave this into anything from an up-close and personal fighting type class PvP combo, or you could even weave this into a Nightblade who just wants to do extra crit damage. That's what I love about crit damage. You can technically build it into anything. Its crit chance, weapon and spell, and crit chance all lead well to its 5-piece, and again, it's a craftable set. And next up, we have Mechanical Accruity. You're generally going to see this more in your up-close and personal type crit builds like Templars, Wardens, things that love crit damage, but not Nightblades as often, just because Nightblades are a little further away, and these usually take a little bit more time to get procced fully, because when you deal non-critical damage, you gain a stack of Mechanical Accruity for 4 seconds, which grants you a 20% critical strike chance per stack up to 1 second every second, and granting a stack up to 5 times. And upon reaching max stacks, or after the effect ends, this effect cannot occur again for 25 seconds. So basically, you can kind of stack your critical chance up to a whole bunch of times, and then you can deal a bunch of critical damage when you have all of your stacks built up, because you're pretty much guaranteed to be doing tons of critical hits at that time. Usually you'll see this again in those up-closey builds, but you could also weave this into a Nightblade if you wanted, but there are just tons of really good Nightblade sets these days. And to end on, I want to talk about Armor Master, a notable, really good defensive set for PvP, because it gives you health, armor, armor, and while you have an armor ability slotted, your max health is increased by 5%, and then when you use an armor ability while in combat, your physical and spell resistance is increased by 5940, which is great because it's unnamed. And also, you can back bar it. You could take this ability from your back bar to your front bar, meaning that you could have a 3-piece Armor Master front bar, which means you could build in like a front bar arena weapon, and then your back bar would just be 2-piece Armor Master weapons, and then maybe 3 body pieces of Armor Master or 3 jewelry pieces, up to you. But it's craftable, it's very easy to work with, and notably, it's just a really good defensive set if you wanted to try to build in an unnamed buff. You could also put it on both of your bars and then just get a 5% max health increase as well, which is also notably pretty good. Everything we talked about has been crafted. Now we get into actual sets. The first one we're going to talk about is Trainee. Now, Trainee is notable because you can only wear 12 pieces of armor at once, generally two 5 pieces and then a monster set, or two 5 pieces and then a mythic. But then if you're wearing a mythic, what do you wear then? Well, the answer is you wear either a one-piece monster set or you slap on Trainee. And Trainee is the perfect one-piece set because it gives you 1454 health, and literally everybody needs some health. Now, if you're a Magicka build, sometimes you'll build in the second piece so you can have additional Magicka, because two-piece 1454 Magicka is pretty good. But notably, for most builds, it's going to be two 5 pieces, a mythic, and then an armor piece of the Trainee. And now let's talk about probably the most popular PvP set in the game, and that's Rallying Cry. Now, Rallying Cry you can buy with Alliance points, or you can buy it on the ESO open market. But because you can buy it with Alliance points, people usually sell it in Mournhold very cheaply. It gives you 2 lines of crit chance, Magicka, and then while Battle Spirit is active, Battle Spirit is just you're in a PvP zone, critically healing yourself or an ally causes you and up to 11 other group members within 12 meters gain 300 weapon and spell damage, unnamed, 1650 crit resistance for 20 seconds, but each group member affected reduces the weapon and spell damage by 15 and reduces the crit resistance by 83. It's just notable because if you're in a larger group, you're not going to be able to get more of a buff for yourself and other players. But if you're running this even solo, this is just a fantastic set. And even if you're running it in a small group, Rallying Cry is OP. Rallying Cry pairs very, very well with every mythic that we've talked about and every set that we've talked about just because it's a very popular set. And the nice thing too is that it's very easy to proc. You're probably going to be healing yourself or an ally. You're probably going to be healing people around you. And then that's going to proc it. And then you're going to get a bonus to your weapon and spell damage as well as your crit resistance, meaning that you can dish out tons of damage to people around you, and they're not going to be able to crit you for really almost any damage in addition to the normal damage output that they would do, because that's going to stack with your impen that you already have on your body pieces. Next up is Briarheart. Now, this is a very popular Overland set that you can buy very affordably, because when you deal critical damage, you gain a 450 weapon and spell damage for 10 seconds, and then while this effect is active, critical strikes heal you for 95 health. This effect can occur once every 15 seconds, and it scales off your max Magicka or stamina. This is an unnamed buff, which is great because this will stack with any of the other buffs that you're getting, either from the Saint Seducer Mythic, Daedric Trickery, or any of the other sets that you might be using to gain buffs or skills that you're using to get buffs. So overall, I think that Briarheart's a fantastic set, and it's relatively affordable. This could be a really good option if you really enjoy kind of close-up PvP stamina builds, where you want to be up close and personal, gives you a little bit of health back to you. The health back to you is not necessarily the key part. It's the fact that you're getting 450 weapon and spell damage that's unnamed and will stack with any other source of weapon and spell damage. Next up is Mark of the Pariah, which also comes from the exact same place, Hrothgar, as Briarheart. It gives you health, armor, and then increases your physical and spell resistance by up to 10,206 based on your missing health. Just a really good all-around defensive set, and it's also very affordable because tons of people are farming to get Briarheart. That might also get Mark of the Pariah. This also was in the Golden Vendor recently, so if you want to buy some golden jewelry pieces of it, you can probably find it on the open market. And overall, I would say it's a really good defensive set, which does beg a good question, because a lot of people will say wear 2 offensive sets and then a defensive one. What actually makes a set defensive? For example, some people will say that a sustain set is defensive because it gives you the ability to activate shields, mobility things. It gives you access to do anything that you would need to do with your resources, like healing yourself. Some people will say that just armor is a defensive set. Some people will say that damage reduction, spell resistance increases are a defensive set. And the answer is that technically all of those things are true. And you as the player have to make that determination on what works best for you. For example, I play a scummy sorcerer. I can full heal myself with my shield using Death Dealer's Feat because my Magicka and health get so high because I do max stat builds that I'm able to crank out tons of shields. So defense to me is just having a lot of Magicka and health. But if you're playing a different type of build, notably probably anything that's not a sorcerer, you probably aren't going to be able to play that way. You may build in a way like a Dragon Knight where their sustain is very good at keeping them alive, or you may be using something like a Templar or a Warden who prefer increasing their physical and spell resistance. That's not to say, though, that as a player, you can't pick and choose how you want to do it. There are definitely some great ways that you could build a Shield Warden, for example, if you wanted. I've seen Max Warden Magicka builds that are also pretty fantastic at dealing damage, being able to heal and shield themselves as well. It's just going to come down to your specific play style. Another good option for a defensive set that you can buy on the ESO open market is Potentates. Reduce your damage taken by players by 3%. And if you wanted to use its full 3-piece, you can also reduce the cost of your ultimate by 15%. This one is good if you're using arena weapons on your front bar. Maybe you want to use an arena weapon on your back bar as well. It'll just depend. It could also be something you use in place of a mythic or a monster set. You could do 2 5-pieces and then this 2-piece on your back bar. And then you could run a full arena weapon DPS one like the Masters something, depending on what builds you're running on your front bar. But if you want to continue with the great crit damage, you could also use Back Alley Gourmand, which notably is going to be highlighted during the Breton Celebration event because this is in Galen. While you have a buff food active, your critical damage and critical healing is increased by 13%. That's unnamed, and that's a significant increase to those damages. For those of you who love dueling builds or doing damage to a lot of single target pressure, Way of Fire is fantastic. It's a Craglorn set, so it's relatively cheap to purchase. And when you deal damage with a weapon, you deal an additional 571 flame damage, and this can occur every 2 seconds. So if you do a lot of pressure by doing a lot of attacks on somebody, Way of Fire will increase the amount of damage that you're doing on them in any sort of specific click. And it's great for dueling, one-on-one, or just being able to focus on one specific person and burst them down. Notably, you see this on things like sorcerers primarily, but you could really weave this into anything that might interest you. And so to wrap up, I'm also going to link in the description our meta report, which goes over every single S tier and A tier PvP set in the description below. And also my PvP build series where we talk about skills, what goes well for what classes, and so on. And that brings us to our final point. How do you use all of the sets that we just mentioned, because they're all accessible to you, except maybe the Mythics, to building a good PvP set for yourself, minus the PvP ones for 10 to 50, because they just go together relatively straightforwardly. And so when it comes to utilizing any or all of those sets that we talked about in this video, we just need to think about a couple things as we as individuals are looking at our specific builds. For example, are you dying because people are one-shotting you? Then you probably need a little bit more resistance. Are you dying because you're running out of resources? And you probably need some more sustain. Look at something like Wretched Vitality. Are you someone who likes to gamble with proc sets? Wait for really good specific combos to run. Well, then run Saint and Seducer with some other proc sets that you can kind of get a really big payoff for. That's the best way to look at these sets. And whenever I'm tweaking my Sorcerer build, I'm usually changing out 1 or 2 sets and noting those differences. Am I dying too quickly? I need more resistances. Am I running out of resources? I need more sustain. Am I not doing enough damage? I need to look at doing something that gives me a higher unnamed buff that I'm not currently getting, because obviously you can't stack the same buff together. You can have a major and minor version of a buff, but you cannot have 2 major versions. It's not going to give you any bonuses. If I'm not doing enough damage to other players, then I need to look at increasing my damage output. So as you take all of this information into kind of your brainal compartments and you think about it, those are what I want you guys to think about. And if you need any help, in the description below, leave a comment or head down to the Discord in the description and ask some questions. I'd be more than willing to give you any sort of advice or things that I could help with. But Tarnished Nightmare with the Saint and Seducer Mythic with Wretched Vitality is a very common combo to see these days, with a trainee piece to go with it. But there's definitely so many different ways that you can build your character. For example, I am on my Sorcerer, which has my max stat build, which is great if you're using a Sorcerer, but also you can wear these on Wardens as well if you're doing a Mag Warden. For example, I have Crafty Alfiq, which goes great with Roxas, because Roxas is a monster set that is basically Death Dealer's Feat. I have Druidic's Curse, 2-piece. You'll also notice we have pieces of Trainee to give us that big stamina oomph there as well. We have those Trainee pieces again. Crafty Alfiq with Death Dealer's Feat. And overall, this is the build that I love. But even as I use this build, I think to myself, man, no, I probably don't need all this magicka. And I've been looking at things like Way of Fire so I could do some more single target pressure and burst people down. So even I myself on this build, which if you've watched live streams, know that it's very competent. It's a very good build. It gives you tons of resources, pretty much more resources than you could ever know what to do with. Even I'm like, do I need this much? Maybe I could take some of my sustain and flip it into something else, like some damage. Or I could take some of my max magicka and flip that, and then turn that into something else like damage or something along those lines. But everyone, thank you for watching. I know this was a long one, so I don't want to weave in too many other concepts. I have a bunch of PvP videos that I made that I'm linked below that'll go over skills, better combos, monster sets, weaving those in, because all of that is important as well. But if you're looking for cheap builds and things to get into, all of the builds that we talked about, all of the sets that we talked about in this video are cheap, affordable, and they're all in the S or the A tier if you were to tier list all of the PvP sets. So all of these are competent. Thank you guys so much again for watching. As always, we're doing our 3 giveaway drawings. All you have to do to enter is leave a comment in the comments below. Tell me which of these sets is your favorite. For me, it's a good question. Probably Death Dealer's Feet, even though that's the Mythic. But I do love Twiceborn. I think it's one of the funnest level up sets to use, even if you're just making trainee gear, not even doing PvP. That's also a pretty good fun one as well. And then from a normal 5-piece Armor Master, in my opinion, is highly underrated, just because how it's not as used as often, but I still think it's fantastic. Second thing is just make sure you're subscribed/follow on Twitch and Twitter. And third thing, look for a hidden word to be flashed up on the screen. If you're the first person to comment that word, you will win. Thank you guys so much again for watching, and I'll catch you later. Bye, guys.
You better remember to like and subscribe to Jakeclips. Or you should. I might have to pluck your eyes if you don't. Or, better yet, I'll skip rope with your entrails. Do it now. Subscribe. Ta-ta. Off with you.